Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Liam Bird, and I'm the presenter of the Punks and Pubs podcast. I was meant to be on stage at the world famous 100 Club today at this time. I think people should have been coming down the stairs and packing into the world famous venue, but obviously because of COVID, this isn't happening. The idea was that myself and some of the panelists that we have today were going to be on stage, and we were going to talk about how basically the money that we were going to raise on that evening was going to go towards helping create unions and to support garment workers in the future, so that they can have better working conditions and try and fight for a better wage. Unfortunately, obviously, COVID has put a stop to that, but we have to remember that this is affecting not just the music industry, who the panelists are from today. It's affecting the many thousands, hundreds of thousands of workers who would have been at work creating clothing for basically the world. So just to give you an idea, there's thousands of factory closures just in Bangladesh alone, laying off millions of workers. This has seen workers from the garment industry go unpaid because Western brands like Primark and Matalan have cancelled their contracts, and some brands are also refusing to pay for their own for the suppliers that have already put the orders in. So we felt it was important that we still had this conversation, even though everyone's kind of in lockdown at the moment. So Punk Ethics has, who are the co-op who have put together Punks Against Sweatshops, have brought a selection of people who were going to be on the stage with me, also some who couldn't make it on the day, unfortunately, but thankfully can make it today, to come together, and we're going to have a chat for the next couple of hours. We're going to talk about supply of where we get our merch, also how the actions that we do can have a lasting effect on the garment workers who are creating our band merch. We're also going to touch on COVID-19 and how it's also affected the music industry as a whole, as well as the garment workers. So I know it sounds quite heavy, but hopefully this will be fun. There are going to be subject matters that you might not know that much about, so I'm hoping that we can all kind of educate and enlighten ourselves today with what we're going to talk about. So just very quickly, I want to introduce the panel. So if the panel could be ready to unmute themselves when I say your name, just so you can say hello and just say how you are, essentially. So I'm going to start with Janey. How are you? I hope you're well.
Hi.
Hey, Janey.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Janey from Dream Nows. I'm very well, thank you.
Perfect. I know where Janey is. There's a massive thunderstorm happening. So if you hear some clattering of lightning or whatever, Janey's not moving furniture. So hello, Janey. Let's go to Jord. How are you, Jord?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I can hear you all loud and clear, and I think this will work good.
Perfect. Steve, we're coming to you next, mate. How are you, pal? I hope you're well. There you go. I can hear you, Steve.
Yeah, fine as the fiddlers, mate.
Yeah, you good?
Yeah, doing all right. Doing all right.
I see you've already got a beer on the go, so you're happy.
Mate,
I know that's good.
Mate, fucking brilliant. It's Saturday night. What more can you? And there's a thunderstorm going on. Fucking brilliant.
Ren, coming to you next. How are you?
Hey, I'm alright. This is Ren from Petrol Girls. In Graz in Austria. Hello.
Hello, Ren. Alan and Gareth, who are together, half of Evil Hour. Sorry. How are you both?
All right.
Yeah, we're fine.
Yeah, we're doing good. We're in Darlington, sunny Darlington in the northeast of England.
Only time we've had sun, and London's had a thunderstorm. So
let's not start on a London-centric ranting straight away. How we get all the weather all the time. Fucking Londoners. And then we're gonna go to Deek. How are you, Deek?
Hi, Liam. I'm good, thanks. No thunderstorms here in sunny Helsinki.
Is that where you are? I see. My ignorance was like, oh, Deek is definitely up in Scotland.
Yeah, not in Scotland. No, I suspect it's pouring with rain there, probably. But
good. So we just kind of touched on COVID a little bit, so I'm just going to quickly touch on that. I know, Steve, you were meant to go on a tour, right? Just as like kind of all this kicked off. I mean, how are you? Like, are you kind of missing being on stage at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at first I thought it wouldn't really affect me that much because the more I can get out of driving down motorways and, you know, or getting on aeroplanes and all that sort of crap, the better. But I must admit, I've got such itchy feet at the moment. And it's not, I just want to get out there and do it. It's, you know, and I think all of the band feel like that. I've spoken to them on this Zoom sort of thing. And yeah, we're doing okay. Everyone's doing okay. But it's this bloody restriction, you know, and it's like, when's it going to stop? You know, I just want to crack on now. Obviously, we can't. But yeah, it's just a thing you've got to deal with, isn't it?
Ren, did you say you're in Austria?
Yeah, I live in Austria.
So how is it in Austria? Like, is it? I'm guessing it's better than what's going on here.
Actually, I have to say that it scares me a bit how bad it is in the UK because we locked down like 2 weeks before the UK did here, and now like I'm back working in the bar. It's like from the 15th we won't even be using masks anymore. There's less than 400 cases left here. And I don't know, I think that is a result of how differently the whole thing was handled. Just sort of think it's worth saying it could have been very fucking different in the UK and the US.
So for you then, are there any like talk of opening up venues so like people can play?
I don't understand German very well, so I don't really know what's going on the news. But yeah, that's I don't know. It doesn't feel like a priority to me at the moment. So.
Yeah. And Jord, are you in the States, mate? Is that where you are right now?
No, I'm from Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation here in Manitoba, Canada. And we're just laying low. Things are starting to open up here, but we're not, I don't think we're going to get itchy feet to go out and play live. I think we're going to let other guinea pigs take the first stab at that, and we'll see kind of how things progress for a while before we jump in. But some of the offers that have come our way don't seem too appealing, like playing drive-in shows to a few hundred carloads of people and that sort of thing. So we're just taking a polite pass on live engagements for the next little while. Some of our stuff got postponed till next May. We were supposed to play in the US, and in Canada, but we're just putting it off for a year minimum, and we'll see what happens in the meantime. Keeping our own health and public health in mind, I think first. We're not too itchy to get out there at the moment.
So I think it's proper and right, before we get onto our main topic, that is Punks Against Sweatshop campaign, that we kind of lead with this question. So today, and for the last few weeks, we've seen millions of people out in the street today protesting against police brutality and social injustice against Black communities globally. I like to think that all of us on this panel support the protests and the movement that the protesters are fighting for, but I mean, is that good enough now? I mean, we're all an all-white panelist right now. I think that's quite obvious. And we're all going to be talking about a subject matter that is predominantly affecting a non-white workforce, because a predominant white punk scene have kind of had this, the want to have this merch. And so therefore, I suppose we have a huge part of responsibility of what's happening there. And we're talking, I suppose, for the punk scene right now. So I suppose my question is, should we be doing more to look at how our community, the punk community, can possibly support the Black voices that are maybe being drowned out right now, And what can we do to kind of do more of the heavy lifting to promote and project a more multicultural voice within the punk community? Jenny, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks. I'm glad that you've named that this is an all-white panel, and I think the fact that this has been organised as an all-white panel and we are all complicit in that as participants is an indication that actually we are not doing as well as we could be in our proactive anti-racist work. And I think it's really important that we just acknowledge that from the beginning. And I think, you know, this is something to bear in mind, all of us, when we accept panel invitations going forward, and for the Punks Against Sweatshops campaign more broadly, that we look around and think, okay, who's in the room and who's not in the room, and why is that? So I'm glad this was named. And I think, to answer your question, we're not doing.
Oh, someone's muted. Jenny, I think you muted yourself.
Oh yeah, I'm done.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Would anyone else like to jump in on this subject matter? Ren?
Oh, sorry, I raised my hand instead of pressing the button. Yeah, no, I think this is a predominant, like, the punk community is very white, but people of colour have always been part of punk rock, and they've been there from the very beginning. And many of the seminal bands at the start involve people of colour. I'm thinking X-Ray, Specs, Polystyrene, etc. And there are a lot of incredible bands with people of colour in them, or that are predominantly people of colour in the scene today, such as the Tuts, Big Joni, Screaming Toenail. They're here. We should be listening to them, supporting them, buying their merch, getting them onto lineups and tours. And yeah, in the same way that with gender stuff, I think for quite a few years now, we've been looking around at gigs and going another all-male lineup, slow clap kind of thing. We need to be starting to do the same about race, is what I would say on that within punk.
I'd even say within podcasting community as well. For me, in particular, with Punks and Pubs, I think that for me, I need to be doing a lot more to kind of introduce myself to more black-led punk bands, because I think that's something that I haven't done enough of, and it's something that I think I need to be doing more of moving forward. So yeah, essentially more can be done, and I suppose it's a lot more listening as well. I mean, that's my point of view. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in. Ren?
Sorry, just wanted to also shout out Decolonise Fest, which is a festival that happens every year in London, that platforms people of colour in bands. Really, really amazing organisation to check out.
Do you know where people can find that?
If you just look up Decolonise Fest on Facebook, some of the members of Big Joni were involved in founding it, and it's a really, really great festival. It's music, but there's also talks and panel discussions. Yeah, Decolonise Fest.
Cool. Janey?
Yeah, just to see and our positionality is important for us to reflect on, and me to reflect on as well, that we're all from the global north and we're all in the global north at the moment. And I think sweatshops are an issue. Yes, they exist in the UK, they exist in Europe, I'm sure they exist in the US as well, but the ones that No Sweat is particularly active with is the sweatshops in Bangladesh. And I think it's really important to acknowledge as well that we could have organisers here from Aporageo, and we could be speaking to people who are doing that grassroots organising on the ground, and maybe that's something that we could do next time. I would.
Thank you. So I think there's a lot more that we can and probably needs to be said in the subject matter, but I would like to move on to the main subject of this Q&A, and that's that is sweatshops. So the idea of touring seems so far long away. I know Ren and Jord have kind of touched on the fact that they're in no rush to get out there. So I'm guessing bands and artists are kind of going to start leaning onto their merch, in particular t-shirts, to generate income. So this is obviously going to put in orders for tens of thousands of new t-shirts or different kind of merch that could possibly be heading its way to factories that run sweatshops. Alan, Gareth, I'm going to come to you with this because some people might not know that you're both union reps. And so I'm hoping you can answer this question a little bit better than what, I mean, the majority of us can. So a lot of people kind of think about sweatshops and they think about it probably from what they've seen in movies or something like that. Can you tell us exactly what the definition of an actual sweatshop is?
Well, I mean, I can't really say this is necessarily our expert area of expertise.
Well, the trade unionists, I mean, I could give you a vague shot. I mean, sweatshops are usually a place where people and workers are exploited. I know in the predominant sense, I think it's predominantly people who are non-white, usually women, and often children, particularly in the past in the garment and electronics industry, where there are limited, if any, protections, usually dangerous places to work where there's very little regulation. I mean, I don't know if that's hitting the nail on the head there, because I wouldn't say, whilst I'm a trade unionist, it's not my area of expertise. So yeah, is that all right?
Yeah. I just thought it's like as trade union members, because I think people might think that sweatshops are very much a East Asia kind of thing that's happening, but obviously there's a huge garment industry in Leicester.
Well, that's it. In the sense, it's not always that kind of classic, view that people have of like sort of the third world sweatshop. It's very, it's happening here and it's happening in the country. And yeah, and I suppose it's basically low paid, unsafe working conditions where people are not given the option to, put forward.
And it's vulnerable people, isn't it, who are often put in that position, in terms of like
asylum seekers, refugees.
But I mean, it's weird. It's one of those things because we always think, and particularly you face with trade unions, whether it's like what would traditionally be, I guess, blue collar or white collar jobs, that people think because in the UK we've got a fairly broad selection of employment law, a lot of it coming from the EU, that protects people, that these things don't happen. And they do. I mean, you can look at it, even in public institutions during the COVID crisis, we know that predominantly in places like care homes, which are low paid, insecure work, predominantly often have BME and migrant workers in them in insecure, unsafe jobs. We know people from like the BME backgrounds are vastly higher at risk of contracting COVID and from dying from it. And yet they're not being provided with PPE. They're being allowed to be essentially exploited in what is public work. So it's not a huge leap to get from that, when that's on the news every day and the government isn't compelled to take action on it, to the fact that there will be people who exploit people even worse in the UK, because it's a spectrum. And whilst sweatshops, as we commonly understand them, are kind of the worst, or one of the worst examples of that.
Sort of a lightning rod example, but it's kind of, it's also the sort of vulnerable financial position that a lot of people from BME backgrounds may be in, or unaccompanied asylum seekers, that kind of thing. People, I think the asylum seeker budget, per week, asylum seekers will receive about £50 a week to live on, and that's it, and that has to cover everything. You're not allowed to engage in legal employment until you've got leave to remain. So often the only option that people have to supplement their income is with unscrupulous employers. And people are open to exploitation. They don't have the same choices,
Yeah. Steve, you've been in the world of music for nearly 40 plus years. I don't want to age you. Has the subject matter of where bands source their merch ever come up when you've been touring? Like, is it an issue that you've heard? Was it more of a kind of a conversational topic in the 80s, the 90s, or do you think it's even a conversation topic now? Like, is it something that people talk about?
No, not really. I mean, for me, it was one of those things when Jay got in touch, and I was like, for fuck's sake, why didn't I think of that? It was just one of those things that passed me by, and I was like, of course. It's like, duh, idiot. And of course, once it, It was, explained to me. Of course we should have been doing that. I mean, Christ, I used to stay, go out with a mate, Biker Dave, and used to stay at his flat at down there in Mile End. And one Sunday morning, dreadful hangover, and there was this sound like 30 fucking drills going on above my head. And it was obviously industrial sewing machines in a flat in Mile End. And I went, what's that? And he went, oh, it's all the sewing machines making T-shirts from Primark, mate. I went, you're fucking joking. He went, no, seriously, they do it. So it goes on all over the place. Yeah, that's for me, that's what it was. It's like a bloody hell, it's just one of those things that pass you by until you're made aware of it. And I think that's the whole point of this thing with No Sweat. It's not saying to people, you must do this or you're a bastard. No, it's like, look, if you can do this, and if you just do one T-shirt of it, make people aware first, and then they can make their own decisions and sort of move on from that. And I think that's the wonderful thing about this thing that we've got going.
Deek, what about yourself, pal?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo a lot of what Steve said. I mean, I think we're probably fairly typical for a touring DIY punk band. And I'd have to say that for years, the main thing that we thought about when we were getting T-shirts done, I mean, initially we actually used to say to people, if you want an Oi Polloi T-shirt, make one yourself. The whole kind of DIY spirit taken to the extreme. But obviously what's happened in recent years is that as sales of hard copies of music have dropped drastically, bands who rely on getting a bit of income to enable them to tour. I think there's a lot of bands that are in this situation where you can just about afford to go on tour, but you're watching the pennies all the time, and you're only like one massive traffic jam that makes you miss a gig away from losing a lot of money. And if you're not independently wealthy, you can't afford to pay out your own pockets. You use merch sales to enable you to tour. And when people aren't buying as many records, they're not buying as many CDs, T-shirts and hoodies and so on have become more and more important. But what we always used to think was, right, we will get these sourced not from a big company, but we're talking about the printing. We'll get DIY punks to do some DIY printing for us. And that was pretty much what we did for years. It was mates of ours who were involved in the political DIY scene. And basically, this subject virtually never came up. I think occasionally people might have said things like, oh, it'd be a nice idea, but it'd be too expensive. Punks aren't going to pay 20 quid for a T-shirt. Now, I think this is where what No Sweat are doing is so positive, because it's completely changed that. Now any bands can get T-shirts from No Sweat, and it still enables them to make a little bit of money to help fund the tour and the people that print the T-shirts as well. So if there's any people in bands watching this, I would encourage you to go on the No Sweat website. And, if anyone needs hints of people that are going to print your T-shirts, we can give you addresses as well, people that print on the No Sweat ones, because I think it makes a massive difference. And I would like to think we all here probably like to think that the medium is the message with what we're doing. And if you've got your T-shirt that says, down with capitalism, and it's printed on something from a sweatshop, it's the complete antithesis of everything we're preaching. So I think now it's great that there is actually something that is within all our hands, to make a positive difference. So I would encourage everyone, like I say, to get your T-shirts from No Sweat.
So Jord, actually, I'm going to jump to you now, mate, because kind of what Deek's talking about, it does kind of rely on the bands who are touring and going on the road. And I would probably guess Propagandhi kind of tours with some of the bigger bands of the punk industry. So, I mean, what can the bigger established bands be doing to make sure that they are kind of pulling their weight, really? And do you think there's even an appetite for that?
Well, I'm not too sure, actually. We don't usually we're up here in Winnipeg. We're not down in LA. We're not really hanging out with too many of our contemporaries in the music world, or even really staying in touch with them a lot of the time. So I can't really comment too much on what the other bands are doing out there. Occasionally when we're on tour, I go around to merch tables just out of curiosity to see what where other bands are sourcing their stuff. And oftentimes I'm kind of a little frustrated, especially at the larger festivals, that understanding a little bit about the economy of some of these things, and the kind of wage gap of the people at the top to the bottom in the music world. It kind of it's a little astounding to see some people kind of relying on low wage garments and that kind of stuff to maximize profit, and that it kind of gets in the way of how I became, into punk music myself in the later 80s, early 90s, and that kind of stuff. And it didn't seem like the music scene back then, before things exploded in, the commercial realm, that maximization of profit was really part of any of the considerations at all. And now you really just see kind of, it makes me think that a lot of agents and groups and labels are really trying to make as much as possible, to squeeze as much as possible. And I think when you start to think of from Gildan Activewear here in Canada, back when they used to manufacture stuff here in Canada, and just to contribute to what Deek said there a little bit earlier, I went through a bunch of my old t-shirts, put out a couple of the records. Randy from Sweden. Here is the Fight Capitalism t-shirt. Randy, one of the last made in Canada Gildan tags that you'll probably ever see, because they moved completely offshore. Yeah, it seems kind of hollow when you start putting stuff with certain slogans and that on stuff that's basically been produced with sweat labor and that kind of stuff. So for us, many years ago, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, like the anti-globalization protests were really happening in the late 90s. And I think at that time, when we started our record label and were tasked with sourcing t-shirts for other bands outside of ourselves, we became a little more aware of sweatshop conditions. And as Gildan slowly closed all of their Canadian shops, all of the manufacturing ended up going offshore, like 100% of it. The only offices they have up here are administrative. And it's we sort of became a little more aware of that company in specific, and how they were like the reasons for getting offshore. And you have to ask yourself, like I think that this whole like bands on tour using t-shirts and that kind of stuff as the means to supplement your income, when you're hardly making anything at all, and it's you're spending money to go out on the road in the early days and that kind of stuff. You don't want to use sweat labor, and then you become aware of the conditions that, say, Gildan is leaving Canada for. Union made shops, minimum wage is being paid here, and they want to go to places such as Haiti, that is where we're going under a lot of unrest at the time. And it's just really it's sickening, like when you think of elected governments in the, say, Haiti or Honduras, coming into power on the basis of increasing minimum wage or doubling a minimum wage, which is, at that time in the late 90s, people making maybe $1 or $2 a day US to make t-shirts. And they're asking to simply, double that minimum wage to make, between $2 and $3 a day instead of $1 a day. And then that government is sent packing, you know, they're with active intervention from the US and Canadian governments to keep those workers down so that companies like Gildan can come in and, you know, use that hyper exploitative model to grind out as much as they possibly can. And these are workforces, you know, women of color pretty much making all these garments. There's no overtime pay. There's no maternity pay at all. No vacation pay. None of these things matter at all. People are required to work 11, 12-hour days for a couple of dollars a day. And then when people are organizing in those countries, they basically get, you know, pushed back, and like all the Canadian trade associations and all that kind of stuff. It's like they don't care about Canadian businesses paying their fair share of taxes in these countries. The goal is to eliminate all the taxes and all the tariffs so that all those profits can go to the bank accounts of white investors and the white management class at the expense of workers of color who are making the damn things to begin with. So I mean, we, as Gildan went offshore completely, we stopped using their stuff, and you know, we started using other union-made products from the U.S. primarily back in those days. And I don't know, like it just seems. I think when the figures come out, it just seems absurd to anybody. I think in England or the U.S. or Canada or in Europe to when you're forced to acknowledge the difference in pay between the people at the top and the bottom. Like I just saw that the Haitian minimum wage is slowly increased over the years. I mean, there was a study a few years ago, the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center, which is, I mean, a union that probably a lot of people have problems with for good reason, but they came up with a livable wage for people in Haiti as being about $23 a day, which was about 4 times their minimum wage. And the best that their unions could ask for reasonably was an increase of about $8 US a day. The management of these merch companies or Gildan and their associates, they wanted an increase of about 50 cents a day. And that's pretty much what happened, keeping those wages right down to the bottom. And when you calculate it now, the person at the very top of the Gildan pay scale makes 572,000 times per day what a person makes on the shop floor. And that's assuming that these people actually get their minimum wage. There's a lot of accusations that many of these companies don't even pay that. And then when they create free trade zones that cross borders and get into this, you know, messy territory of kind of denationalizing or infringing on the sovereignty of people's labor, like domestic labor law and stuff like that, it's you know, there's a lot of people that are working under the table. They're not really officially, you know, members of any unions, and whether they're even getting paid the minimum is highly questionable. And yeah, it's just gross. And I think that especially with the offshore sweatshops, it's definitely like if we want to talk in terms of structural racism or systemic racism, this is where we're at this point in 2020, after, you know, centuries of, you know, the history of colonization and imperialism leading us to this point, this hyper exploitation. And it every time it seems like there's a local initiative or a regional economic bloc for some of these countries to join, say the Bolivarian Alliance of the Americas. Many years ago, a lot of these countries were joining that, and Canada and the US got in the way of that, saying, no, our model's better. You stay away from that. You pay attention to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and just keep those wages low so that capital, you know, there's always the threat that capital is going to leave the country and flee if wages and worker conditions increase, and that kind of race to the bottom logic is what we are dealing with in the North. And all the trade representatives and government reps here in Canada want to basically be on that side, so that the Gildens of the world can make off with their exorbitant profits. And I mean, what's to say for some of these people to take a slight decrease in what they're making in the management level, so that people have a livable wage? Like, a livable wage should be the bare minimum of what we're trying to get going here. Like, this isn't talking about overthrowing the system or anything like that. This is just like literally a preferential option for the abject poor in the global South.
So for everyone, this is kind of a question, but also to you, Jord, when you are doing those rounds then around the merch table, and you see a band that does have like a Gildan t-shirt, do you engage with them and try and educate them and why they shouldn't have this? Or is it something like, it's not really my place, like I don't know their circumstance, I'm just going to walk away?
Well, at that level, honestly, I don't know of how many larger festivals you've been to, but it's pretty much, these are very socially isolated things back in the green rooms. I honestly, you hardly ever really commiserate or meet anybody at all. Everybody's in their own little sort of private dwellings and that sort of thing. I've never really gotten into anybody's face in particular, like, you know, a band coming off stage and getting in their face about it, that kind of stuff. I've usually just kind of taken notes, you know, for myself, just out of curiosity. But that's something, I guess, to, you know, for, you know, down the path to become a little more active and a little more upfront that way. But to be honest, a lot of bands that we travel with, you know, that aren't making a lot of money being on the road, or paying out of pocket to be on the road, you know, a lot of people are using Sweatshop based stuff because they feel like they can't afford anything else. A lot of the merch that we get is kind of like usually double the cost of a lot of the Sweatshop stuff. So we essentially absorb that cost ourselves, you know, at the merch table when we're pricing our stuff. And I would just hope that the bands at the top would have a little bit of room. Like, if you want to keep all that profit, add a few bucks and charge that to the consumers up here. But yeah, it's difficult for me to kind of critique bands that are, you know, really struggling to get by for using, you know, lower wage options for their merch stuff. It's something that I kind of dance around a little bit here and there. But I think it's also part of a larger question that we might get into later, or, you know, for down the path about, you know, with these structures in place and the sweatshops working and that kind of stuff, I don't think anybody necessarily wants to pull the plug completely and organize absolute boycotts in these countries, because many of those workers down there are unfortunately completely dependent on these shops for bringing in the little that they have. Yeah. And if you take that away, then you're looking at starvation and issues like of that matter. So it's really kind of complex. I'd like to think that we can generally be unified in demanding livable wages for people in sweatshops, and things start to slowly rise. But I guess that all remains to be seen.
We're going to come to that in a second. Janey, I know you wanted to come in.
Yeah, Jord, I just wanted to speak to your point, as I'm from a feminist punk band, like DIY punk band, so we're kind of very much at the bottom end of the like music industry kind of hierarchy. And I do think it is just a matter of like political priority and political choice, because for us, like, we switched to no sweat last year, and we very much made it as a decision knowing that it would reduce our profit margins on our merch, which, you know, because of the dire exploitative state of the music industry itself, like, bands are basically just surviving by being traveling shops. But we just decided as a DIY feminist punk band, we could not be complicit in the exploitation of women of color in the global South while we're on stage singing feminist punk. So I think, you know, if bands are facing that question, like, can we afford it? Like, I think you just got to check yourself and be like, on a human level, how can you afford not to? This is bullshit.
Ren.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, people will pay more. Like, we switched to, I think we did our first run of shirts ever on Gildan, because when we first started, we were hiring a car to get to shows, and like, we needed to sell the t-shirts in order to make enough money to be able to get to the show. Like, we've all been there. Switched to ethical brands and just upped the price. And we had a lot of discussions about that, because we were like, well, we want people to be able to afford our merch, blah, 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 blah. But that's not the priority, really, is it? And I think another thing that I would say to any like DIY bands or bands that are just starting is, we just started making our own patches on scrap material. And you wouldn't believe what people will pay for a patch. And they don't really cost you anything to make, and we use that to supplement the difference. So that's a good one if you're new to it. But it's the bigger bands that have got to do it. Like, it's these big, like, we tour with bigger bands and they're all printing on Gildan, like nearly all of them. Like, and that's where the change needs to happen, because then the screen printers will be able to buy in the No Sweat or like other Sweatshop free brands at like bigger bulk, therefore lowering costs and making it more accessible for DIY bands. But I think it's the people at the top of the chain that we've really got to be pointing the fingers at with that.
It's all fucking quiet, isn't it?
Muted.
Liam, you're muted.
Oh, mate, see, I'm doing my own thing that I told everyone else not to do. Deek, you wanted to jump in, pal.
Yeah, I was just going to second what both Janey and Ren were saying. I think people are not just willing to pay a little bit more, but they're very happy to. And I think you can still, I mean, goes back to what I was saying earlier about the No Sweat shirts. I mean, they're putting them out for about £4.50. So it's still quite possible for bands to make a few quid off them. And audiences are happy to pay a bit more. And I think it gets the word out as well. And going back to what Jord was saying, yeah, it can be difficult you don't want to start going and having a go at people, as it were, you know, a band that you notice that they're printing on something else, because I think people tend to become very defensive in a situation like that. But our approach nowadays is to say, hey, have you heard about these ones? You know, people are happy to pay, you know, a couple of euros more, a couple of quid more, or whatever. And look, this is where you can get them from, you know. So we tend to take No Sweat leaflets and so on with us now. And, you know, we just kind of plug it. And the reaction is overwhelmingly supportive. We haven't really come across anyone who said, oh, this is ridiculous, people won't pay that money. I think that's not the case anymore.
Jord, did you want to jump back in, mate?
Yeah, just quick. That's really good to hear that, like, if people are supportive and, you know, you get the word out, have pamphlets at the merch table and all that kind of stuff. I think one way to kind of like just a symbolic way of, you know, charge a few bucks extra for the t-shirt to offset the extra, you know, costs, you know, for the labor and that kind of stuff with non-sweat material. I think for a lot of people in the crowd that are chugging back beers at a few bucks a purchase, to basically just kind of put it out there, hey, buy a beer for the person who made the shirts, you know. And I think more often than not, people are supportive of that kind of thing. If it's put out there and they have to consider it, sure, why not? I'm doing well here as an average wage earner here in Canada or the US or whatever. Why not? Why can't I afford a few extra bucks for that sort of thing? People are happy to pay it. And I think you're right. People are usually quite supportive of it. And I don't think I've ever come across somebody who's argued the other way, that, you know, you should make your t-shirts cheaper by a few dollars, regardless of where they come from. I don't think I've ever heard of that argument. So,
Alan, Gareth, we're going to come to you before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, I think it was just kind of further on from the point that Jord and Deek were making, really, in that, yeah, we would never get in people's faces if we were aware that they were kind of using different merch. But I do think, you know, this is one time when, you know, raising awareness actually works directly. You know, we talk to people about what we use, we put the flyers on the merch table, we end up with a lot of interest from, you know, people asking us about, you know, oh, what is this company? You know, it's a talking point, and it's a talking point that kind of raises awareness that, you know, I mean, certainly when we started out, we weren't necessarily, you know, we were like 17, 18, we weren't necessarily aware of kind of the impacts of what we were doing. And as we got older and got wiser, you know, we found the shirts, we found that they were better quality, and we just sort of absorbed the financial hit that came with that, you know. And, you know, similar to what you were saying, it's like, you know, if somebody's in there paying a £5 for every drink, you know, there isn't really any reason why, you know, the t-shirts couldn't be slightly more expensive. Yeah.
But credit to No Sweat, really, because what they've done is they've made it accessible for people. Because usually the arguments I remember it being, and, you know, we should have switched sooner. I was lazy, you know. I went on the internet and looked for some fair trade stuff, and some of the stuff you can find is insanely expensive for small bands to buy in small batches.
Yeah, and when we were starting out, it was kind of, we were always having to weigh that up. But
I probably could have found it if I'd looked harder, and I should have. But No Sweat have put it there for people now, where it is accessible. It isn't exorbitantly more expensive, and, you know, it's a really good way of engaging people and saying, look, we're making this accessible for you. Please join us. And
the conversations themselves also naturally lead on to kind of discussions about trade unionism and joining unions. So it's actually, you know, it's important on several different levels.
Steve, Crass were famous for obviously not producing merch and just kind of handing out stencils for supporters of the bands to kind of do it themselves. Was that because you didn't want to go down the sweatshop and merch route, like trying to find an ethical merch, or was it a case that in the 80s it was just a lot harder really to mass produce t-shirts?
Well, it weren't in the 80s, it was the 70s.
70s, so, apologies.
Yeah, well, no, you weren't even fucking born, were you? No, it wasn't a case of that. You just didn't think. It was like, and the whole ethic of punk was do it yourself. So, you know, I mean, obviously the Crass symbol is that I can't draw the fucker. I've tried it, but I can't fucking do it. Right? But I've seen people with tattoos. How the fuck do you do? I've seen a crop circle. How the fuck do you do that? I can't draw it. So obviously there's people out there who aren't artistic or whatever. They might be autistic, brilliant, because I'm one of them. But not artistic. So what we did was, look, if you want a Crass t-shirt, we ain't going to print them. First, it was too expensive, or for some reason. But secondly, look, take the stencil and you can change it if you want. You can spray it. You can spray it anywhere. And what I used to like back in the 70s and the early 80s, and Deek will probably agree with me with this, was that I loved the old graffiti. Just people coming out in whatever they wanted. It wasn't this mass-produced thing. It was like your identity. What you chose to do that day was what you did, and that's a wonderful thing. But and I know what people are going to say. Yeah, but now you do Crass t-shirts and all this sort of thing. Yeah, but that's because people were buying bootlegs all the time, and I was like, well, fuck that then. I want it. So, but if you want something that's done, you know, and that's why I instantly joined up with the No Sweat lot. With Jay, you know, and the bunch, was because it suddenly made sense. It's like, yeah, and of course I should have done that. You know, I'm repeating myself about what I said earlier. But the people that should be doing it, if every band in the world does one No Sweat t-shirt, right, just one. Because then, if it costs more to produce it, and people are fucking buying it, it's like £2 more. You know, sorry, Jord, but you know that's $6 more or whatever. I'm fucking buying it. Yeah, but just one, just every, like Rihanna, all the famous people, you know, the big rock and rollers, you know, David Bowie, if you were alive, you know, I'm pretty sure that you would go for No Sweat, Mark Bolan, and all those, the Who, all the people, Queen, you know, who were left out of Queen. If everyone, or put Sir Paul McCartney, Sir John Elton, Lady Gaga, please just on your stall do one No Sweat T-shirt, and people will go for it.
Yeah,
And that's the people we've got to fucking aim for, because it's all come down. I feel I feel sometimes I'm being persecuted. You know, I'm being fucking like, oh, you should fucking do this thing. Well, I'm trying. What more can I do? What more can I fucking do than you know, to join this thing? And it's not saying to people, you can't do that T-shirt. You can't fucking have this thingy. That it's just make people aware, and people will go, do you know what? That's a fucking good. I'll buy into that. And that's what other people were saying was, you know, we put the leaflets out on our table, on our merch store, and people come and go, oh, what's this then? They go, oh, fucking hell, that's all right. The only problem we've got is the larger people, because the material from the T-shirts tends to be very tailored. So for the larger people, it's a bit too sort of, so that's got to be looked into.
So Deek, I mean, Steve kind of mentioned because you were saying earlier on that you were stenciling. You've kind of said someone wants a stencil, I'll happily give them a stencil. Like, do you think that, especially in punk, where that's DIY ethic is kind of basically ingrained into our community? Do you think that's something that we probably need to go back to, even like the bigger bands, to look at like kind of stenciling your own shirts and then put it out yourself?
Sorry, was that to me or Steve?
It was to you, Deek, but if Steve wants to jump in as well.
Yeah, Steve?
I think it's okay.
I mean, I'm not really sure that there's, you know, that everyone's going to be, you're going to be getting everyone doing their own T-shirts. There are plenty of people do their own T-shirts. But as we talked about before, it is now a vastly important part of, you know, the economics of being a band. If you're not lucky enough to be independently wealthy, you need to sell stuff, you know, to keep on the road. I have seen, this is a slightly different thing, but there's a German band do a rather interesting thing, where what they do is they buy back their T-shirts. They basically allow you to rent their T-shirts, and they'll buy them back from you after a few years for a certain amount of the price, and then they'll resell them. It's typical. I forget the name of the band now. But I thought that was a really interesting idea. But no, I think, you know, it's great if people do DIY T-shirts, but you're not going to get bands giving it up. You know, it's too important part of what bands need to keep financing themselves.
Yeah, sorry, Deek, if I can come back. Sorry to the rest of you to pop in like this. I do beg your pardon. But Deek, I totally agree with you. But all I was talking about was, no, I don't expect people to do their own, you know, obviously, you know, I want to sell T-shirts because that puts petrol in the you know, in the car, in a van, you know, for the next gig. So you know how it will work, that kind of thing. But all I'm saying is that just by making people aware of this thing, that for a couple of quid more, like, you can have this T-shirt and it makes you aware of this sort of thing, and that sort of moves it on, and more people get into it. And it's not telling people you must do this or you mustn't do that. It's just like, try this, try that, you know. So that's all I was saying, Deek, you know.
Ren, I'm going to jump to you because kind of looking at the other side as well, I know you wrote an article, I think it was in Kerrang, where actually you spoke about how the sweatshop isn't just an ethical issue, it's also a feminist issue, because garment workers are predominantly female. I mean, would you like to just kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, can do. So sweatshop workers are predominantly women, and predominantly women of colour. And I mean, it follows on from what Janey was saying earlier about how it's pretty fucked to be a feminist band and say the sort of shit that we do on stage and not back that up with like thinking about things like where our merch is sourced. I think the issue of sexual harassment and sexual assault is like very prevalent and rife within sweatshops. It's something that we like speak and do a lot about. And I think, God, there's just so many different angles to talk about this from, because I think also what I think I really love about No Sweat is that they are actually listening to and supporting the initiatives that workers are doing in those countries. Because I think something that I read and then like wrote about was there's a researcher called Minha T. Pham who's like really amazing on this stuff. And she pointed out that the fashion media isn't talking about how these garment workers, they're striking all the time, like really, really militant, powerful, amazing industrial action on a regular basis. Like, I think I wrote a thing about it last year, and I think it was like 50,000 were out in Bangladesh on strike. Like, that's amazing numbers, and yet there's nothing about it in the fashion media. And she's arguing that it's because the garment workers there, they don't fit the fashion media's narrative of them as like these tragic victims. And this is something that I think is really important to address from like a feminist perspective. Yeah, what did she say? She said they don't look like the female powerhouses that are the revered subjects of fashion feature stories. But yeah, they're the ones that we need to be looking to.
I'm going to come back to that issue because it's something that I know Janey's written about for The Guardian, but I just want to quickly come to Alan Gareth.
I was just going to say, I think Ren's like making the most important point there about putting in on people's hands their own power. This isn't the importance of No Sweat is it's not some kind of, I think people, the standard term is the white saviour, the benevolence, charity sort of aspect of it. It's about saying to people, what we're going to do is we're going to support you in your union organising and your collective voice and the sustainability of that. Because, I mean, I remember when I first heard of sweatshops, it was probably the 90s, I guess, growing up as a kid. And it was the Nike thing and the Nike shops and the 3 pence a day to make Nike. And, you know, I kind of remember vaguely, I might not be right, at the end of that campaign, there was kind of Nike to get some kind of positive media. We're like, oh, well, we put it up to 6 pence. And it's like, regardless of whether that is a bullshit raise anyway, what that does is that then shifts the focus. And, you know, 10 years' time, where are those workers without collective bargaining power? And also, nobody from outside their sphere should be telling them what is an acceptable wage, what is acceptable terms and conditions. That is for them to decide, and it's that sustainability. And I think in terms of the kind of, just to point the sexual violence and the threat of violence as well, the people organising in trade unions in countries where there aren't, I mean, there's meant to be labour laws for freedom of association there, but women trade unionists, the threats of sexual violence and actual physical assault by company owners, and trade unionists around the world in countries that are more unstable are in prison currently from wider than just the garment industry, from sort of mining. The teachers union president in Iran is injured. So people, you know, companies test out their union busting tactics in the US, Canada and the UK. You know, you've seen the Walmart videos of like an Amazon put out to, they say they're fans of unions, but then they take it to an extreme in countries where they know they can get away with it. And I think, you know, it's a really important point of No Sweat's work is that side of things that they're doing.
By the way, if people want to know more about No Sweat, I think there's some stuff going in the chat board on the Facebook account. So make sure you check that out in case you don't know what No Sweat's about. Janey, I'm going to jump to you because you wrote an article in The Guardian that kind of that links the hypocrisy that Ren was talking about with feminist slogans being that were being made in sweatshops. I know the Spice Girls and Beyonce have been accused of doing just that. I mean, how can like our community, our punk community, kind of put pressure on these behemoths of musical stars? I mean, supposedly Britney Spears does actually source ethical t-shirts, so that's good that Britney's doing that. But I mean, how do we get to like the Beyoncés and the Spice Girls? I've kind of asked you, Janey, to kind of answer a really hard question.
I mean, I don't know. I know, and I don't know if it is something that like comes from us or what the strategy for that would be, because it definitely needs to be like an organized strategy. I do think we're reaching like a global tipping point now, especially this week. But you know, feminism since Me Too kind of like just blew the roof off loads of things a couple of years ago. Do you feel like there are a lot more mainstream conversations around like feminism? Similarly, Black Lives Matter, I think, you know, political education is coming to the fore, and just as anyone wouldn't buy like, you know, their political education books off Amazon because of the workers' rights, like why would you buy your feminist slogan t-shirt from a sweatshop? It just doesn't make sense. But I think because of global capitalism, because the disconnect we all live with, we just don't think, we're just not used to thinking about like supply chains and like how we are connected to so many people all over the world just through our purchases and how we like choose to live our lives. So I just think like there needs to be a broader just shift in like the way that we consume, the way that we think as individuals and as a society, and it not being so rapid and consumerist and just like hyperactive. But if globally we could all just slow down, take a look around and bring our values in line with how we're spending and how we're behaving, then naturally the music industry, I would hope, would follow suit and it would become the norm.
I know Jay's kind of listening to this and looking after the Facebook. If you can put up Ren's and Janey's articles that they've written, that'd be great, so people can kind of check that out and know what we're talking about. This is a kind of a question to everyone, and I don't know if everyone's going to want to jump on this one, but there's going to be people listening to this who might say, I think Jord kind of touched on it earlier on, that sweatshops are horrible, but despite that, they're kind of they're needed. Like sweatshops are the first step outside of extreme poverty. There was a University of Michigan report that they did that said that sweatshop manufacturings, especially ones that produce T-shirts for foreign markets, are central tools to raise people out of really bad economic circumstances. So what do the panel say to these people who might have these thoughts that, yes, sweatshops are bad, but they're needed? And what about the MIT study? Does anyone, Ren, do you want to jump in on that?
So my first thing would be like economic prosperity for who? Because I don't think that economic prosperity is going to be felt by the people working. I would question whether economic prosperity is the measure that we should be using, given that capitalism is killing the planet, clearly in crisis and not sustainable. I would also ask why countries like Bangladesh, where Operajo is based, are not economically prosperous, and what role colonialism has had to play in that is not something I know much about at all, but I do know that Bangladesh was part of the British Empire, and I'm pretty sure there were economic consequences of that. Like, so what are the lasting impacts of colonialism, and why should it end up being like garment workers in Bangladesh and other workers in that country that suffer the consequences of trying to change that? I don't think economic prosperity equals a decent life for workers. And MIT ultimately are not these workers. And they're the people that we need to be listening to. That, again, to come back to why I think No Sweat is really great, because it's listening to and actively supporting that struggle from like two different directions. But that said, I want to go back to something that Minha T. Pham said, which is that international, and it links to something that Jord was saying earlier, actually, because she writes that international boycotts that aren't coordinated with and led by agent garment workers smack of Western arrogance and can hurt the very people these boycotts are intended to help. These consumer actions can make a tense working environment more stressful, reduce jobs in an already precarious industry, and cripple a major economic lifeline for families and communities. So I think it's like, it's a complex thing, because I think people are economically reliant on sweatshops and labor that they're doing in sweatshops. And that's why we have to be really, really careful to follow their lead in order to figure out how we change it moving forward.
Janey.
Yeah, Ren's already said it. I was just going to say that in any context, liberation is always on the terms of the oppressed, and solidarity is also on the terms of the oppressed. So I think it's impossible for any of us to truly answer that question without having a garment worker in the room.
Yeah. Alan, Gareth? Or just Gareth at the moment?
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be all or nothing approach. I think, as like Ren was saying about sort of, it shouldn't be some Western-led boycott that just removes it. But what we can do is, when we've got the option to support things where people are unionising, is pick that option. It's like using capitalism against them by making the financially viable and positive one that's getting people's interest, the one that supports more workers' rights and gives more worker empowerment.
I'm gonna I think for people kind of for people listening to this or watching this, for them to kind of relate as well. I know, like, there's a lot of people who are in the scene will wear clothing that is synonymous with the punk. So Converse, for instance, is a clothing wear that's kind of renowned for the punk scene, and it's if people don't know, it's made by Nike. But Nike have had their own reports on Converse, for instance, whereabouts they've had many factories that haven't even set their standards of working conditions. So how can people who kind of buy that kind of product? I mean, for instance, my mobile phone I know has minerals from the Congo, and the laptop that I'm using right now and that all of us are using has mineral parts, whereabouts people are throwing themselves out of windows in China. There's little things to catch them. I mean, can anyone actually really live a real ethical lifestyle? And should we be beating ourselves up if we can't? That's again a question to everyone.
No, of course you can't. Of course you can't live life avoiding ants on a path. You're going to kill them. So unless you want to be what they call Janes, where they sort of put that into the ground, and I can't remember what they were called. Of course you can't. But no, you can't. You do the best you can. As Flux of Pink Indians had it right, strive to survive, causing least suffering possible, and that still stands today. It's difficult for me to sort of listen to this conversation, between these people, because I got into punk. I was 19 years old, came from a working class background. That don't mean nothing, but there's this new thing called punk, new identity. I want the clothes. I want this. Rip up your clothes. Do all this kind of thing. Do it yourself. Brilliant, fantastic. And now we're talking about all these different things, and it's a bit overwhelming. And I think we've got to be careful of that as well, because too much information will turn people off. We've got to be very delicate about it. Very careful. Just let people in. Open a door, and then open a door. Let them push it open with their foot, and then they can make their own decisions about it, what they want to do, and that's the way forward. It's not you must do this.
Ren, I'm going to come to you in 2 seconds, but I'm interested, Steve, because do you think Crass well, yourself with your links to Crass, do you think you're held to a higher standard than most of our punk bands, because you have that kind of anarchist, there was that anarchist belief system around the band? Do you think you are, if you do something that's kind of more mainstream, do you think your fans kind of jump on you a lot more than probably something like another band? I don't know off the top of my head, but
oh yeah, mate. If I was to do a song like George Michael did, I'm Never Gonna Dance Again, I'd be crucified from the nearest lamppost. But but do you know what? One day I'm going to do it.
You do it, mate. You do it for all of us.
I've got to fucking do it. Yeah. With a Gildan t-shirt on, so I can.
Ren, come to you now.
I just wanted to say with this, I think that we just need to move the focus a bit away from individual life choices and more towards supporting collective action, really, because I think you can get really bogged down in all of these little individual choices, and I think it can become very paralyzing and quite isolating. And I think that perfectionism is like quite a toxic issue within like punk, particularly the more political end of it sometimes. And yeah, I just think that collective action is always going to be a lot more valuable than like, you know, having a go at someone for like an individual choice. Shift of focus, I think, for me.
Al and Gareth?
Yeah, I mean, sort of further on from that point, really, and because, you know, it is paralysing when you start thinking about the fact that it's impossible for most of us to kind of live in the West without having some kind of negative global impact somewhere, you know, because as you say, you know, you can give up certain things, but we're all sitting here doing this on technology that exists because of Sweatshop. You know, so you can throw your mobile phone into the sea and all that kind of thing. But and I think there was an earlier question about kind of like the impact of the punk scene as well, because I think we all have to be very mindful that the impact of the punk scene in terms of it globally is absolutely minuscule. And I think there's a lot of issues a lot of the time where it's too easy for bands to think that they're doing something just by writing a song or like raising awareness. And there is a personal responsibility around the choices that you make, but Ren is exactly right when it's about that kind of collective responsibility. You know, join a trade union, engage politically, but most importantly, organise outside of the punk scene, because in terms of global impact, we ain't doing fuck all, really. You know, and we've also got a thing where it's kind of a captive audience of people who all agree with us anyway. You know, generally people enter into the punk scene because they have certain political leanings, or, you know, we kind of feel similar ways about the same things, you know, so you sort of preaching to, even with what we're doing and even with this format here, we are essentially preaching to the converted. So it is a real case of making sure that you organise outside of the punk scene, and, you know, a personal responsibility to do that.
Jord, I'm interested to know, like, if there's that appetite in Canada in particular to really kind of jump on the ethical source, not even just clothing, just kind of looking at more kind of the organic side of merchandising. Is that something that's like really rooted in Canada?
Well, I think there's, you know, I'm probably a significant amount of support from people over the years. But yeah, like getting back to what we're talking about, you know, in terms of overwhelming people with too much, and, you know, just we don't want to just reduce things down to ethical consumer choices and leave that as the be all end all of our interactions. But yeah, like without adding too much to the overwhelming sort of nature of these issues, like I agree. We have to view ourselves as being part of the world and humanity, and not just, you know, identifying ourselves as punks, you know, as our complete identity. We have to, you know, be involved in other progressive movements and all that kind of stuff. But it does get very, very complicated. Like there's NGOs up the yin yang here in Canada and elsewhere that talk the talk of progress, and they're kind of, you know, walking hand in hand with a lot of the you know, the managerial class, and planning for, you know, essentially sustaining this hyper exploitative model. And when you get kids coming out of university, and you know, a lot of people want to do the right thing. I'm thinking back to when the earthquake happened in Haiti, and there was so many students and activist groups that wanted to do something to help, but all they pretty much did was sort of curry favor with the status quo, more or less, and didn't really provide too much of a radical alternative. A lot of the labor groups here in Canada, and like they might speak towards feminism or that kind of stuff, but if you follow the money trail and who they're funded by and the results of their work, it's not really doing much at all. And in a lot of cases, it entrenches the powers that be with this facade of progressive politics attached to it. And I think that's just another level of all this stuff that has to be, discussed, debated. It's a lot of work with that just alone. And so I think it's like figuring out which organizations are doing real work for real people at the bottom, and supporting those, and just going on with this ongoing critique and dialogue, dissecting groups that aren't really doing much more than lip service to human rights and that sort of stuff. And it's an ongoing battle, and it always will be. And I don't think that definitely we don't want to reduce it to just hey, you buy your t-shirt from there, you get a free pass on all this kind of stuff. But I mean, there's so much going on. There's so many negative issues that I think we just need to fundamentally recognize that the people working in sweatshops in the global South, it is a racist set of relations that we have. Fundamentally, that's what keeps it going. That's the history of the last 500 years in this part of the world is sort of the interests of the industrialists and capitalist classes to create a low wage zone in South America and the Caribbean to basically compete with China, to keep wages that low that investors want to have an alternate that will compete with China that is sort of more regionally based, and under the power of the US and the United and Canada. So it's, I mean, it is a lot to digest. Sometimes I feel like just closing the door on the book and, just kind of, concentrating on other things. But if you're going to be involved in bands and you're going to sell merch, it kind of comes with the territory. You got to understand the issues and be able to, respond to the questions.
So we're going to start wrapping up now, but I just want to quickly touch on one point because there's going to be people listening to this, and we spoke about no sweat. I mean, what else can people listening to this do to make sure that they are supporting people who are making our merch? And I think it was touched on earlier on by Alan Gareth, that it's not charity, it's kind of solidarity, not charity. And like, I mean, what can people listening to this or watching this do, in your opinion, to kind of help support to create a more ethical and a better kind of way of life for the people who are making our merch?
Well, I'll tell you what, don't fuck about. If someone falls over in front of you, pick them up. If he's your worst enemy, pick them up. Give them resus. I don't know, if someone's drowning, pull them out to sea. If someone needs a hug or a cuddle because they're depressed, give them a fucking hug. I don't know, if someone needs feeding, give them some fucking food. Fuck it. We're people, we should look after each other. And that's all. And if part of that becomes part of what we've been talking about tonight, then that's it. But don't fuck about. Forget all the fucking words and all the theories and all the stuff we've been talking about. Fuck that. No bollocks. If people need help, give them fucking help, and that's all there is to it. We're human beings, and we deserve a life. And that's what we should be working towards. And however small a way you do it, that's the way you fucking do it. But that's it.
I should have came to you first, Steve. We could have saved ourselves an hour and a half.
Oh, well, you fuck off. Oh, you fuck off.
Does anyone else want to jump in before I go to maybe some questions? No? Yep, go on, Janey.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's gone crazy at the end.
No, I was just gonna say, like, we're not just musicians and we're not just in bands. Like, we also probably go to gigs as well, and we'll go to the merch table as people wanting to buy merch, and I think we can start those conversations from the other side as well. And I think similarly, when we're like, the union that we're a part of in our normal workplace, if you have day jobs like most DIY musicians will, like, what union you're part of, where does your union source its clothing from, where does your union source its merch from? Awkward question, but what you know, how does everything stack up in alignment with the values that we have?
Alan, Gareth, did you want to jump in? Was that a slip of the hand?
Yeah, it was just a really quick from us. I mean, in terms of kind of things that you can actually do, because there's a real issue at the moment around like kind of charity replacing actual kind of systemic change that is going to improve things. And whilst I definitely agree with what you're saying, Steve, like that we should be helping people when, you know, they need things, there needs to be that kind of systemic change that actually replaces the need for charity at all. And this is really just going to come through like pressure to your MP, joining a political party. And then, I mean, obviously with the situation at the moment, there has obviously been a lot of kind of people flagellating themselves in public, and it's about, you know, rather than doing that, just make the choice and just be better. You know, join local agencies like things like Stand Up to Racism, and bottom line is join a fucking union. You know, get yourself involved in kind of like the direct action, you know, within your workplace, you know, because we're all, you know, punk, there's no money in punk, you know, most of us all got jobs as well. And it's about taking that kind of direct action into your local areas and local communities. And if you're more engaged with union work on a personal level, then obviously the work of No Sweat is going to resonate more with you, and you're going to be able to sort of articulate that more effectively to people that you come into contact with. So yeah, bottom line is just be better.
Yeah, fair enough. Can I just come back quickly? Yeah, I agree with what you said. Yeah, absolutely. But the way I was coming from it was that if I'm at a gig or something, you know, or you know, a festival, you know, Rebellion or something like that, if someone falls over and they need help, I'll give them help. I don't give a fuck who it is. And it's just, that's bottom line. We're all people. We need each other, and let's help each other out. So all we're talking about tonight is an extension of that. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, just be better human beings, essentially.
Yeah. Be nice.
Be nice. So we're going to come to the end now, but we are going to do some questions, if that's okay with everyone. There's a couple that's come in the comment section. But if people have been listening and want to know more about the work that's been done at Punk Ethics, or if you're in a band and or a printing company and want to know how you can pledge to only working with union factory suppliers, so Jay is now going to put up some links where actually you can find a bit more information on how to do that. Also, Punks Against Sweatshops have done a compilation album with many of the people who are actually on this chat right now, as well as many more. It's called Give Sweatshops the Boot. You can find it on Bandcamp, and the proceeds for that as well would go towards helping garment workers to unionize again, so they can fight for better wages and better conditions. So go pick up a digital copy. Again, Jay's going to put up links now on the Facebook commentary that's going on right now. So I'm just going to go to a couple of questions. One here is by a gentleman called Trevor, who asked, do we engage with sweatshops? The question is, how do we engage with sweatshops to improve workers' rights rather than avoid? My fear is that we will hurt the ones we're trying to protect. Does anyone want to jump in that? Ren? You started nodding, and I was like, I'm going to Ren.
No, I just think it's a really good point. I was just sort of nodding along, but I think that, yeah, like follow, like, I mean, I don't know any other examples besides No Sweat, because like what is great about No Sweat is that they are buying t-shirts from a workers' cooperative run by ex-sweatshop workers, some of them in Operaggio, survivors of the Rana Plaza disaster. But at the same time, the profits are also being ploughed back into supporting sweatshop workers' unions, so having an actual impact on people that are working in sweatshops at the moment. That's what impresses me about No Sweat as a campaign, and why I've got so much respect for it. But yeah, I wish I could give sort of more examples, but I can't.
Deek? Deek, you muted still, pal.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to second what Ren was saying, but also to come back on this argument that some of the sort of cynics raise when they say that if you're not buying from a sweatshop and you're buying from a place like No Sweat instead, that you're somehow hurting sweatshop workers. Well, that's the exact opposite of the case, because the more people who order from workers' cooperatives, the more the demand is, and they're going to be able to increase in size and take on more workers. So no one is actually getting harmed, but you're significantly improving the prospects of people who are in that industry at the moment. So it's I don't really see that argument as holding much weight at all.
Unless anyone else wants to jump in, I've got another question. This is a gentleman called Paul. A question to all: what do you think each of us can do to get more bands / artists involved in the Punk Against Sweatshop cause? I've got a few ideas, but I mean, what would you do as a band to make the movement bigger? Anyone want to jump on that one?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, of course, kind of, Steve. Essentially, they want to know what bands, or what's your advice to just kind of like Joe Public to make sure that the Punks Against Sweatshop cause gets bigger?
Well, make your own fucking t-shirt.
There you go.
Get a Sharpie and draw on something. I don't know. Fucking hell. I'm not a guru.
Alan, Gareth, I'm coming to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just really simple. It's just speak to people. I mean, we obviously play gigs where it is a bit more kind of everyone's in the same room together, so it's just like having chats with like bands beforehand, making sure that people are aware of it. I mean, I think mainly everybody here has said that they put the kind of flyers on the merch stand and everything like that, and that naturally kind of generates a bit of conversation around it anyway. But it's just making sure that bands who are using No Sweat are making it obvious they're doing so, and they're talking to people about the fact that they're doing so as well. Yeah, perhaps not the most intelligent point, but you just got to keep talking, you know.
Janey?
Yeah, you just made the point that I was going to say. Just keep talking about it all the time, relentlessly. Like at every gig we play, we mention it on stage, we talk about it at the merch table, we'll talk about it to other bands, like just, and also I agree with what was said earlier, just like in a kind, informative, like, hey, did you know this kind of way, not a righteous way, because I think righteousness just switches people off and it's not helpful, and I think can sometimes be a bit unkind. So yeah, keeping it kind as well.
Well, we've just come over an hour and a half, so I think it's a good time to wrap up, because obviously we're taking all your times. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone, the panelists who have given up their time to talk and discuss sometimes quite a difficult issue.
Oh, sorry, Liam.
Go, Steve, go on.
Sorry to interrupt you. Did we get paid for this?
Oh, yeah. Talk to Jay.
Right, Sweatshops.
Would anyone like to just like a final word before we all jump? Jord?
Further to that last question, I think that's somebody, you know, if you're up for it and you're going to shows as a fan of bands, you know, you can always bring those questions up to people at the merch table or to band members themselves. Hey, have you ever heard of No Sweat? Have you ever heard of these options? What do you think of that? Maybe you guys would want to check that out at some point. I think that kind of feedback, if people hear it more than once or twice, it'll resonate with people. And like we were saying earlier, a lot of people are very supportive and happy to support when the issue's there and it's front and center. And I mean, you're talking about a few dollars extra here and there. And I think that's something that anybody can afford, you know, in Europe and North America for this kind of thing. So.
Fantastic. Ren, Steve, Deek, Al, Gareth, Jord, Janey, thank you so much for your time. Just to let everyone know, this will go up as a video on YouTube from Punk Ethics. If people are listening to this who want to sign up to Punks Against Sweatshop campaign, go to punkethics.com. Unless anyone else got anything else to say, we'll let
Join a union. Join a union.
Yeah.
Find out what your union is in your workplace and join it. And make sure everybody else that you work with joins it as well, because without a collective group of people, it doesn't work if there's only one person in the union. That's the nature of it. You've got to be together. So join a union.
The TUC web, for anyone who doesn't know, the TUC website has a really good union finder where you can search in your industry and find the best union.
You're freezing. You're
Oh, okay. Ren?
I hate doing this because this is not the central issue right now, but on behalf of all of the women that are involved in this, I'm part of a case. I'm one of the defendants in Solidarity Not Silence, and actually shout out to Alan, Gareth and to Janey for being absolutely sound in supporting me and the other women that are involved in this. There's a bunch of us being sued for defamation for speaking up about an abuser in the punk community. We got bad news about 48 hours ago. It's a fucking rough ride. It's ruining my late 20s and it's absolutely fucking up a lot of other women's lives. We need help with our legal costs. So that's another campaign that I would ask you to check out. And I realise it's not the most sensitive time to be talking about this shit and I feel awkward as fuck about it, but we got to raise those legal costs. Please help us out.
Ren, if you can send me a link, I'll put it on the podcast socials as well, so it gets out there a bit more. Thank you to everyone for your time, and continue to make sure you're checking out the Punk Ethics social media site so you know what they're doing. Again, check out No Sweat, and stay well, stay safe, and I hope we get to do this actually in real life, the 100 Club, in maybe a year's time when humanity is allowed to exist again. Thank you, everyone.
If we do that, it's going to tell you what, it's going to give a fucking aspirin headache.
Bye, guys. Thank you very much.
See you, mate.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you all. Thank you.